And then coming home was a shock. And we came home here 20 years ago, and in a ward that they really didn't need us. I mean, there were clones of us everywhere, you know, and which is good. I mean, that's not something to complain about, but it was like, but we missed being able to be so involved in that way. Now, at that time, Kyle, you need to start asking me questions because I just meander here.
No, so let's just say that this first segment, we're at about an hour.
Okay.
And this segment's going to be kind of representing your faithful time. So
yeah.
What other stories do you think are really important for the listeners to know to sort of capstone your faithful Mormon experience?
Well, one of the things, if we're going to before this time, is, you know,
so the next episode will be your faith challenges.
My third son, we could kind of tell as a teenager that he was a little different, and thinking, could Josh be gay? And but then you go, no. And then you go back and forth that you kind of know, but you kind of don't. And basically at that time, I really didn't have any feelings about that one way or the other. I had not been around that many gay people. And then but then my boss, when I first started working at 18, she was a lesbian, but I knew she was a lesbian, but I didn't know what that meant. You know, you just didn't question anything, I guess, you know, and unless somebody was really open about things. But it was a great experience, and all the gay people, when I thought about it up to that point that I'd ever been around, were wonderful human beings. I had a guy that has done my hair now for years and years and years, and he was one of the first people, and I've even told Ron, I said, you're one of the reasons why I had such good experience or good formation, because you were such a good person. That's all I had to go from, because I never got anything negative from my parents. And at the time, the world really that I lived in didn't talk about things very much. You know, I just had these experiences going along and stuff. But then when he was 18 and confirmed to us that you don't know for sure until they tell you, and they don't know for sure until they say it. And he told Terry first, and then he was coming home here to tell me, and we went upstairs and sat in the chair, and I remember thinking, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? What am I going to say? Because I knew it was really important that I say the right thing, and how did I feel, you know? And so when he was sitting there, and he told me and stuff, and I said, welcome to the world. I've been watching you as a square peg try to fit in a round hole all of your life. I'm so glad you know who you are. And I felt love for him. I didn't feel anything. But then it was like, uh-oh, now what are we going to do? You know? And you go through a period of time, because then that's church. You know, we were active, believing, faithful, committed, in members, you know. And now all of a sudden we've got this problem. But see, at the time, it was still kind of, it was interesting because people would ask, well, what are we going to do, or all this stuff. And I remember thinking, what do you mean, what are we going to do? You know, life goes on. I mean, I didn't know I had to do something, right? Because 20 years ago, it was a choice in the church. You know, it was, Dallin Oaks was saying things like, don't let your kids around. Your gay members don't, you know. Everybody was getting kicked out of their houses. There was all of this going on, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, you know, if we kick Josh out, that would destroy my family. Not keeping him in my family. I mean, I didn't get that. I didn't get that rhetoric at all. People have asked me why Terry and I were like that, but I don't know how else to explain it. I don't know. We just felt he was my son. I loved my child. I knew my child. And I felt, and that was...
Around what year was this?
This was, he was 18, he's 36, so about 18, it's been about 18,
so
19,
around
20
2000.
years old. Yeah, and it was like,
So this
yeah.
is after Magic Johnson.
Yeah. Oh, you know, speaking of Magic Johnson, that was interesting because Magic Johnson came on television, and my kids were into basketball, you know, and all that stuff. And he did a press conference, and he said something. He said, God gave me this disease, and I'm going to do all I can to be helpful to other people who have it, and to help and to do this and blah blah blah, you know. And I remember sitting there looking at that, and I remember I walked over, turned the TV off, and I turned around and looked at my kids. I said, God didn't give him that disease. He gave it to himself by his behavior and his actions in his life. He created that problem. God didn't. I said, now, is God going to be with him? Yes. Is God going to help him? Yes, I believe that. I believe that. But this is wrong. It didn't work for me, you know. Yeah. And God didn't give anything to Josh to overcome either. He didn't do any of those things. Josh is Josh. That's who he is and how he was born. And I remember that was so hard, and trying to figure that and the church out. And then I remember I called this woman up who had a beauty salon, and I knew her son worked there, and I knew her son was gay, because I couldn't talk to anyone. There wasn't anyone you could talk to. And I called her one day, and I said, can I come and talk to you? And she said, yes. I said, I'm a stranger, and I know you have a gay son. I just want to talk to somebody, and I want to talk to a mother. She said, come over, and I went over. We went at the top of her business there, and we sat there, and I just asked her questions and how it was, and I was really lucky because she loved her son and had accepted her son. It wasn't somebody telling me anything bad. And it was really nice to talk to someone and say that. I called a counselor one time and was talking to the counselor, and I made this appointment, and I said, I just want to come in and talk about some things. And she said, okay. And then before I hung up, I said, can I ask you a question? Yes. What do you think about homosexuality? And she said, oh, well, it's an abomination. And she used words like pedophilia and even, what's the animal one?
Bestiality.
Bestiality. She used these words, and I remember looking at my phone just horrified, and I'm going, oh my gosh. And I put the phone back up to my ear, and I said, how long has it been since you were in school? She said, 5 years. I've been out 5 years. And I said, I think you need to go back to school. Why? I said, because I think you need to relearn some things. And then she said, does this mean that you're not coming in for counseling? I said, that's exactly what it means. And so, I kind of felt like, there weren't places for us to go. My children, this is really an important story. You don't get very many opportunities to see your children being noble. And my children were noble. They were wonderful kids, and they were so good to Josh. But Josh asked me if I would tell Jonathan, and Jonathan's younger than Josh. And I said, okay. So I was in the car with Jonathan, and I said to John, John, Josh asked me to tell you something. Yes. He's gay. And John buried his head in his hands and started to sob. And he said, why has my life been so easy and Josh's so hard? You know what I mean about being noble? I mean, it's like, he could have said, oh, why is my brother doing this to us? Anything. Completely loved him and accepted him and just had so much empathy for him.
Do you connect any of that to your parents? Mm-hmm. Their influence? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it has to come from there, and and I think I've just been surrounded by some really wonderful people in my life, and decent people. My dad, that's the story I wanted to tell you, because my dad, born in the 30s, Air Force, baseball player, man's man, Army guy, all that stuff. And Josh, my dad because my mother had to go to work when we were kids and they didn't want to get a babysitter. My mother would work nights and my dad would work days. And so my dad had to learn how to cook. And I was always kind of a novelty because my dad cooked, and my dad would have my friends over, and my dad would cook for my friends. Well, my dad always cooked. He cooked all of his life, and one of the funnest times you could have is going over to Meryl's kitchen and sitting down, and I don't care what was in the fridge, he just pulled it out, would make it, and you would eat. And anyway, so Josh, my kids were very close to my parents, and he asked me and Terry if we would go out and tell my parents, because he said I don't think I could handle it, my grandfather rejecting me. So we said, okay. And it was really hard for me because even though my dad was really a good guy, he's still a product of his times. I had no idea what to expect, and I really kind of knew my mother would be all right with it because that's how my mother was. And when we went and told him, I still remember like when Kennedy died. I remember when Kennedy died. And I remember me here and Terry there and my dad there and my mother there. And we told them, and my dad hung his head and he cried this deep guttural cry that men cry, that you never hear, that sound. And I had never heard before, and I thought, oh. And then he lifted his head and he said, in tears, you tell that grandson of mine that he will always be my grandson and that I will always love him. And he can bring his friends here. And he goes, and then of course we're all crying now. And then he says, now, I don't want any of that mushy, kissy stuff or anything like that. And he said, no, I'd tell Jenny and Jared that same thing too. And I said, Dad, Josh would never embarrass you or do anything like that. But till my dad died, my dad was Josh's advocate. And Josh never had to give anything up. And his whole family has been around. In fact, I think he had a therapist say one time that his family was his secret weapon.
Yeah. Did Josh serve a mission?
No.
So what was it like to have been a bishop multiple times, Relief Society president multiple times, in the gospel to win it, 100% committed, full throttle, and then you've got a son. Where is he in the order?
3.
You've got
no, he's the second son out of 3 boys.
Okay, so your number 2 son's not going on a mission, probably going to be leaving the church and is gay. Like, what is that doing to like your theology, your beliefs, your standards, your testimony? Like, how are you working through that at the time?
That was the moment, because for one thing it was hard because we knew we couldn't serve a mission and that, but he was raised to serve a mission, and he was raised to want a family. He was raised to have things, and I know those were some of his deepest sorrows, that he wouldn't be able to have a family in a traditional way and all of those things. And the thing is, though, what was I hope you can edit this. The hard part was trying to tell him, after we told him all of his life, to serve a mission. Now it had to change to, it doesn't matter, you don't have to serve a mission, we still love you. But the damage has been done in that, you have to, do you know what I mean? It's like, I've told parents now, the thing with my parents, I think that they did really well was the fact that we were raised on principles. We weren't raised on rites of passage or things we had to do. So if we chose to get married in an LDS temple or chose to go to Vegas or whatever, it would be all right just as long as we had good principles and we were good people. My dad and mom expected us to be good people, always to be good people and to be kind people and those things. So there weren't any things we could fail at other than if we were miserable people, right? But sometimes in an LDS home, when you have all these rites of passage, and if they can't make one, how do you tell a kid they're okay? Do you know what I mean? I think we need to go back to this principle thing. So if they choose to go on a mission, that's a good thing. If they don't, it's still a good thing, because they've got everything that's important in their character, and stuff like that. Instead of having, and so there we were, like, how do we do this? And this is very personal because, I have to tell you, there's a movie called 20th Century Women, and it's still out. Annette Bening's in it, and it's a fabulous movie. But there's one line in there that was really interesting, in that she's talking to this girl that's dating her son. And she says to this girl, I envy you. I envy you because you get to see my son in real life. And I know what that means. You're a parent. Have you ever had moments, I've only had a couple, where I can say, I've seen my children in their real life, acting like their real selves. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they're my kid, or they're like you expect them to be. But when you get a glimpse and you get to see them in real life, that is such an amazing thing that doesn't happen very often. And well, as I'm talking right now, I realize my kids are going to watch this and see Mom in real life as I'm talking about things that I haven't talked about before, And I hope I'm doing it a service. I hope it's right and stuff. And forgive me if I have some things mixed up. But I'm explaining things in my real life that I was going through with Josh at the time that I've never really explained to him how I felt about that. And I remember that, so at the time I started questioning, well, how does this fit with church? And how can I let Josh know that I love him just as much? That mission didn't matter. But I also realized, how do you unlearn that?
Especially after Terry's mission had been so formative, right?
But they grew up on the lore of a Walker missionary, the lore of that mission, the things. Their father was an assistant for 9 months. Their father had these amazing experiences. Jared went to Venezuela and had this fabulous mission. He didn't have the mission president, his dad did, but he had a wonderful, fabulous mission. And there are all these things, and you're like, how do you say to your kids, it's okay, we don't measure you by that, and stuff like that. So I think, it's hard. And then it's like, I remember at the time, boy, this is really raw here, but as I'm analyzing everything, the church at that point had to be over here while I figured all of this out. Because I couldn't put the two together, because they wouldn't, it was like oil and water. How are we going to do this thing, But then we thought, no, I'm going to find the loopholes. Like, whatever has been revealed will yet be revealed, that there's more coming. We're going to understand this, And it was also, this is the great leading into the next chapter, it was also because that was the first time I ever said to myself, could the brethren be wrong? Could the brethren be wrong? Because I was right. I was his mother.
Mother love trumps prophecy.
Yes. and any day, if I remember at the time thinking, at any time I will kneel before anyone and say I choose him.
Would you have told your bishop this? Like,
yes.
People in your ward?
Yes. Yes.
This wasn't some secret thing
you
hid under a bushel.
But see, at the time, though, we kind of, didn't talk, because it wasn't a safe atmosphere to talk about this, because not only did we want Josh to marry, we wanted Josh to have a rich and full life in every way.
Marry
we never once said to him to be celibate. Never once.
What do you mean marry? Marry a man or marry?
Yeah, marry a man.
Okay.
Why would I want something different for him than I want for my other kids? I'd raise them all to be happy, to find love, to have fulfillment in their life. And yeah, it was going to be different, and we had to learn new things. I had to mourn, Terry and I had to mourn the daughter-in-law we would never have. We had to mourn the children, grandchildren we would probably never have. But we didn't mourn having him. It was just the dream changed a little bit, for him. But we still had the same wishes for him that we had for our other kids, and we couldn't talk about that. In fact, at one point, Terry gave Josh a blessing, because Josh was still trying to figure everything out too. And Terry gave him a blessing and released him from the church, from everything.
Wow.
And told him that we loved him, that he was ours, and that he blessed him as a father to be a good man, live a good life. And it was very, very profound for us. But I told one person, and I can't believe I'm saying this here, but I told one person and they said, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
That's what my Mormon braid said.
That's
use the priesthood to release someone from church.
That's unheard of. But see, Terry just wanted him to know it was okay. We didn't know how to tell him it was okay. How do you do that?
Yeah.
You know? How do you do that? So that was the beginning. That was the, that was the, it's not like we thought it was, And then I went through a thing as a mother that was very difficult because I remember thinking back little things that Josh would do that I didn't understand. And so, like, he wanted to hang out with me in the kitchen, or he wanted to do little things with me, and I'd go, oh, Josh, don't you want to run outside and play? Don't you want to do this, do that, And it was like, I kind of felt like he wasn't acting the way he was supposed to act, but I couldn't put my finger on it, so, and then there were things that little things that he would do, like when his dad would pull up to let the girls out, and then the guys would all walk in later. Josh would get out with the girls, and I go, Josh, get back in the car with Dad, walk in with Dad, Just cute, funny things like that. But I also realized that those were messages being sent to him that his behavior wasn't right. And that broke my heart. I had to go through a period of time where even though I never said things, there were things that because I didn't know, and stuff. So that's why in today's world that kids are growing up and parents can maybe see that their children might be headed that direction, they can not have those messages. They can those, as you are educated and you understand how things are, we've got some family members that I wonder about, and things that way, and it's just so much more healthy. There was a movie, Love Actually, where Liam Neeson has a son, and the son's depressed. They've just lost their mother, his wife, and the son's been really depressed, and he's really worried. It's really messing the son up, and he says, he's sitting there talking with him on the bench, and he says, you've been a little down lately, or whatever. Is there something going on? And he says, is it about your mom or something like that? The scene was, and he says, no, he said, it's this, no, I'm in love, or something like that, And the dad goes, is that what it is? You're in love? And he goes, well, who is him or her? And then the little boy said, oh, it's a her, and her name's Stella, or something like that. I've totally messed up the scene, but the point was, I loved how the father just said, well, who is it? And it didn't matter. The kid didn't feel at that moment like whatever his choice was, it was going to be a good or a bad choice. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It was just a natural, organic conversation. I don't know. And I know that anybody that's listening to this is probably thinking, Sister Turner's going to hell. But I'm sorry, but that's how I felt about it.
That's great.
I thought it was illuminating. So all these things were coming together now that I love the church. I had a very strong testimony. There's a phrase I used to say that what I understand, I love. What I don't understand, I trust. So if I came up against something I didn't get, I would just trust that God was in charge. Mm-hmm. God was in charge. There's some reason bothers me that blacks don't hold the priesthood, but there's some reason that God knows that I don't know, and I kept giving it over, just giving it over. Well, now all of a sudden, I can't give this one over because we didn't feel like it was right. And that's the other thing is, it's been a privilege to be with Terry because, dads with sons and things like that. And Terry has never once hesitated or he's been totally supportive of Josh and me. And it just blows me away that we were at one with this, from the beginning. Now, when you do everyday stuff and normal stuff, yeah, we can fight like cats and dogs, and we can have problems with all kinds of things. But the big things in life, I've been privileged to have someone that has shared, where we've shared that same view. And I have such empathy for people that have, opposites or have to deal with that. That would be kind of traumatic, I think, to go through.
So by the early 2000s, because of Josh coming out as gay, you started asking yourself if maybe the brethren or the church didn't have it all right. How did things progress in terms of things starting to unravel? Were there next sort of important moments where other things started to unravel? I started
being taught. The universe started to teach me. I remember thinking that Josh was broken, and that in the next life he would be repaired, and every hair on your head will be restored. And then I'm sitting there talking to someone, and they were saying about they were just talking, just in a conversation in a group, and they were saying how someone had said that to him, and how terrible that was, that they considered him a flaw, and that they can, and all this stuff. And then he talked about it and everything, and I remember sitting there being taught, and I went, I'm never saying that again. I'm never saying that again. He is whole. He is how he was supposed to be. I don't know how it all works, but that's just who he is. And so I threw that one out the window really fast, just from that person being brave enough to talk about that experience. There were little things like that kept going, and then Prop 8 came. Well, the proclamation came out, and 95, something like that? I don't know. That was like...
Proclamation on the Family.
Yeah, that was
You didn't like it. You didn't celebrate that.
No, because there's all kinds of families. There's grandparents raising kids, and single moms and single dads, and why do you want to start creating... I know the church, I will always have to preach the ideal, but that doesn't mean that they can't show compassion. And I don't know. I just felt like it denigrated or dismissed all kinds of families that were functioning fully as families, and they needed support. They didn't need to be marginalized or be made different, because a lot of times they were made different through no fault of their own, or just circumstances. So, there were things like that always kind of bothered me. What was really interesting at the time is I told Terry, I said, you know what? If I didn't know better, I'd say this was a legal brief. And we just laughed about that. And then we talked about that years later.
It was.
It was. I feel like it was. I mean, there were case law was already being created in Hawaii.
Did you hear my interview with Nadine Hansen?
No, I haven't heard.
Yeah, she talks about that.
Oh yeah, it's already being developed, and long before Prop 8.
The church needed some document to be able to show they had a vested interest in being sort of, amicus, friend of the court, sort of filing briefs. And so it was drafted initially by lawyers so that the church could then have legal standing to fight same-sex marriage. Yep. That was the impetus of the freaking document.
And then it wasn't even shown to any of the female presidencies. No one had a say in this, and they're talking about the family.
Yeah.
There was no female voice,
of course,
in any of it. And so it's like, okay, But see, I didn't know that back then. I just knew it bothered me for this. But then I'm going, when I was reading it that time, I just thought, this is all this, But so then there that is. So there's little things that are bothering me, and then I remember one time finding out that this is a good one. I saw this book called Mormon Enigma. Emma Smith, A Mormon Enigma, right? And I thought, we never talk about Emma. This church never talks about Emma. And I didn't believe what Brigham Young said, that Joseph said he would go to hell for Emma, and Brigham said he might have to. And people would make these little jokes about Emma, and I thought, that's not fair. There's something here I wanted to know more about Emma. So when I saw that book, and trust me, I'm that person that you never said Gerald or Sandra Tanner's name, let alone read anything they wrote. I mean, they were like Hitler for our country. You didn't talk about that. And by the way, I have apologized to Sandra for those feelings that I had, not knowing her. But anyway, so there's all this anti-Mormon literature out there, but you wouldn't be caught dead. Not caught dead. I don't even know how to explain that mindset. It's a high demand religion, right? And that was one of the things that it demanded, that you just stayed away from anything that it wasn't a different way of thinking or looking at the church. So I see this Mormon Enigma because it was a desert book, you know, and in the beginning, and I got it, and when I started reading it, I remember one day, this isn't a book about Emma. This is a book about Joseph Smith. And that was the first time I knew about all of those things about Joseph Smith. And that was like, and then I kept going, part of my brain's going, no, this is anti-Mormon literature. I need to throw this away.
Do you have a sense for what year this is?
I think it was in the 90s.
Still in the 90s?
Yeah.
Before Josh comes out?
Yeah. And we're like going to Bolivia, I think. So it's 80. Was it? Yeah, it was 95, 94, 93, something like that. But the thing is there's something inside of me that took my breath away when I read it, because I knew there was things that were true in this book. And I had never experienced that inconsistency before. I was always just, you know, even and in and believed and never had a doubt or a worry. And it was like, I didn't know what to do with that feeling, so I handed the book to Terry and I said, here. And he looked through it like this and he goes, oh, this is anti-Mormon. You need to throw this away. Which I tease him about that all the time. And so we went to throw it away, but I think I did throw it away, and Jared found it in the garbage and read it. And Jared, from the minute Jared started reading when he was about 10 years old, reading lots of books, he's read books for as long as I've known him, like on everything, and he knows everything. And that was probably one of his first books. And anyway, but I remember that stuck with me. And I've had the author standing right here in front of my fireplace talking to people about, now that you asked me, I can't remember her name. Not Tippett's, the other,
right.
She's wonderful. Now you can't
Tippett's
remember
Avery
either.
And I'll think about it. Yeah.
She was great. I'll get to it. It'll come. This is what happens when you get older. It doesn't go away. You just have to wait 5 or 6 minutes or 5 or 6 seconds, and then it rolls down into the slot, and then there it is. So anyway, so I'd had that one. That stuck in my head.
Linda King Newell.
Yes,
I
Linda
cheated.
Newell. She was wonderful, and she told us the story about that, and her and Valine Tippett's, and what happened to them during that experience, and it was an incredible night having her here. But that book, it just did something, and then
You had her here in the 90s?
No, had her here a year ago.
Recently, yeah. Okay, yeah.
So anyway, so there's these little things. So the gay issue had setting me up. I was learning new things and feeling new experiences in my head, and things weren't adding up as easily as they always added up. And then this.
Prop 8, you said.
Mm-hmm. And then this book. And then, gosh, I'm trying to think.
How'd you go from Prop 8 to listening to Mormon Stories? Is there anything that kind of took you on that path?
Well, we never found you till after we were already done or going through
Except
things.
I remember seeing you guys at meetings
at
when
Affirmation.
You were still in.
You saw us at Affirmation.
Yeah.
That was the first time we met.
I remember waiting years, when are they gonna kind of move, you know?
Well, this is the thing. We weren't done when we started doing Mormon Stories, but we were pretty much there, and Mormon Stories was like the frosting on the cake. And then it was like we couldn't, 24/7, we're like reading everything. Because see, this is the thing. Terry and I are both first children, and we were obedient children. And so when we started thinking about things, we had all these questions. We thought we were just asking questions. and that we needed answers for, because we had these things that we were dealing with that nobody had ever discussed, or said, well, how does this work with a gay child? How does this work with these things I'm reading about, and stuff? But we were fully confident there would be answers. That we didn't want to get out. We wanted to stay in. We just wanted our questions answered. We want to how do we deal with this, because we're not feeling it the same way, right? We're doing all that stuff. So it's like, how does this all work? And let me think.
Do you remember what happened between Prop 8 and when you guys decided that you were done, or you didn't believe anymore?
Okay, Prop 8 happens. That really bothers us. At this point, people in the ward know we have a gay son, and and they know. And there's a few people that some things are said across the pulpit that weren't very kind. People were talking about being asked to go down to California to protest or send money, those kinds of things. Those all made us feel very uncomfortable. And to be honest with you, I think Prop 8 is what kind of blew a hole in my family with my kids too. It just started with my kids at that point too, because I think everybody was still thinking, maybe there's a way we can have both, right, or do whatever. But then we could kind of see it was falling apart. All that being able to.
So when your kids start questioning and doubting.
But see, they were still very subtle about it, and they were still doing it. We were all on our own journey, really, actually. And I know someone in the ward here had said that, well, she knew why the whole family went out, because I drug everybody out. Because I'm more noisy on Facebook, for example, or something. But no, that wasn't the story, and that's not how it went. And
everyone has their own journey.
Everyone has their own journey.
Nobody takes anybody out. People take themselves out.
And most of the time I want to say, well, why don't you just ask? I'd be very happy to tell you the story. Why?
Oh, they don't want to know that.
They don't want to know the story.
So as your kids start bailing intellectually over Prop 8, but you guys stay in until what year?
Well, my kids don't start bailing at this point. Where are we at? Okay, when we're starting to kind of go through our thing, Jared had struggled his whole life, basically, but he did serve a mission. He's done all the things that he was raised to do. But we knew he struggled. We always knew that he struggled, always. And I think because Jared is the oldest of our family, he has a very special relationship with the rest of my children. He was always that guy that, when they were going to college, that he would always say, hey, make sure your butt's in the seat. You don't miss college. You don't miss this, and he's always, wanted them to excel, and he's been very protective of all of them. And Jenny was very active in the church. Josh at this point was no longer attending church. John was extremely active in church, and so was JC. All of them were. John had a fabulous mission, loved his mission and everything. And then John comes home from his mission, and then I'm trying to think how we started. I think probably the first one to really have some questions was Jenny, but she didn't tell anybody. And I feel kind of uncomfortable talking about my kids' stories, because I think it's their stories to tell.
Sure.
So I'll do a very brief thing, and then one day, JC decides that she's done. And JC's done. Fast. Done. And that was...
So you have Josh and JC out. That's 2 of 5. Yeah,
that was very traumatic, even though Terry and I were going through our stuff, figuring it out. That was really traumatic, because we were saying, one crisis at a time, let us finish ours, and then you can do your crisis to stay where you are, That was really interesting to have JC do that, and to find out how she felt. And it was agonizing for her. It was agonizing for her. It was agonizing for all of my children. It was not something that they were glad or happy about or anything. It was very hard. It was very...
Did she come out to you?
JC?
As a non-believer? Mm-hmm. What'd she say? Well, you don't have to share if you want to share.
Yeah, because and you know, and then her and Travis had to figure that out, you know, and how that was going to work.
Because she was married.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say this, that JC could have no finer people as in-laws than her in-laws, who, you know, who are very active in the church, want their children to be active in the church, love their children, and yet when this happened with JC, they were nothing but kind and loving to JC. Nothing. They were exemplary. It can be done. It can be done. And I know in their heart of hearts they want something different. It would hope for something different. I know that. And I honor that. I know what that feels like and stuff. And so she you know, they've worked all that out, and they're doing wonderful. But see, but then when JC did, I think that gave Jared permission to, and I may be wrong, but I think it gave him permission to be more open about things and stuff that way, that he didn't have to. And so.
Then it's your oldest.
That's my oldest.
Now you're up to 3 out of 5.
Yeah. And then when John told us that he'd been having struggles, that was like a heartbreaker, because John was probably the most tender about the church and everything that way, and just loved the church. And he grew up having the best experience in the church, I think, out of all of my kids. He was here in this house and in this ward, and he had a really wonderful childhood
in Draper
here with them, and so did JC when she was younger. And so when we found out about John, all of a sudden, you know, and then they knew about Terry and I, and we started talking. And there's one thing, one of your questions that you had down was, what would you do different, you know, about transitioning or whatever, or talking about that. I have a son-in-law who's married to Jenny, who is still a believing, practicing Mormon. And when I look back, because we all kind of went through it together, and then when we all started talking together, we've always been a family that talked. Always. Dinner tables, 2-hour conversations. We've always been like that. Always. I think my children are each other's best friends, so it would be natural for them to talk about these things and do all of these things. But I think that at times it had to be very difficult for Andy, because the whole family reneged on the deal. And
Except Jenny,
Except Jenny goes to church with Andy and supports Andy, and they support each other, and they have worked that out. And I admire him so much.
But all the in-laws are bailing.
But when we were together, we would say things that I know that we probably wounded him by things that were said, as we were angry, as we were mad, as we were saying, why this, why that, and going through all those things and talking about those things. And I wish we would have been a little bit more sensitive in that way. But he still loves us, and he's an exemplary father. I love Andy with all of my heart, and you know, and it's hard, and sometimes I just feel like he's just in a tough position.
Sure.
Yeah, but he still loves us, and we still love him, and try to honor. Then we ask permission for things that you know, maybe that we do now that we wouldn't have done before, and things like that. But I think it's been pretty difficult. But the two of them are working things out and talking, and they're doing fine. They're doing great.
So it sounds like there was sort of a bit of a death by 1,000 cuts to your testimony over maybe a decade or two.
I'd say acutely maybe 8 years.
Okay.
8 years, and then acute 5 years. It was an acute reaction
13
to
total,
everything.
are you saying? 13 total?
8 years where 3 of it was like,
What were those?
We're in trouble, you know, like after Prop 8.
Okay.
We can't do this anymore. Blacks bothered us, and now this with the gay. Oh, this is getting really. And could they be wrong? You know, it's just. And then it bothered me about the mall. It bothered me when I heard that Elder Uchtdorf blessed the Marriott next to the Polynesian Center. You know, there were just things that I started to see that I never saw before. I just never saw before. Read section 132. I never saw that before. There were so many things that, as things kind of opened up, we're going, you know, this is interesting. But there's a way. There's still a way. We're going to find it. We're going to do it. It's going to happen, and we're going to find out that there's a reason for it, and all this stuff. But see, once you take that thinking away, that there's a reason for it, and that God is in charge, you're left with yourself. And that's an incredible, scary feeling in the beginning, but it becomes an incredibly empowering experience later on, as you start reading and learning. And that's what I was going to tell you before. We were going to do this right. You know, Mormons do everything right? We were going to do it right. And so we only read from source material. We only read diaries. We read from original editions. We read all these things because it was too precious to us. We were mucking around in dangerous territory, and we didn't know what the outcome was going to be. Because as we kept going, we knew one thing: we had to keep going. We had to keep going, and we couldn't stop. And then once we started, we found Mormon Stories. We found you. That affirmation was the last affirmation that I ever attended, because when I sat in a testimony meeting, it ripped my heart out with all these beautiful young people feeling like failures, or a bunch of square pegs trying to fit in a round hole. I couldn't do that anymore. And so I would...
That was the year the young, Stephen.
Yeah,
Stephen,
and I wanted
Barbara
to put
Young came.
I wanted to go in front of the door and say, stop, don't come in here. I wanted to say, this church isn't ready for you. You will never be whole in this church. You will never be considered par with everyone else or equal. Go live your life. Go be happy. You know, just be. And that was the last time. And I think that's when I first met you.
That was around 2013, right?
Is that what 2013?
Don't you think?
Yeah.
So were there things that
the essays
really
came out.
slammed the door for you?
The essays came out. And then when you're thinking all my life, I said, okay, that blacks in the priesthood, God did that. That was a revelation from God for reasons God only understood, and his prophets just passed the word out, right? And then all of a sudden you read the essay and you find out that it was not even a revelation. It was a policy. It was devastating. It was like, I thought those things and did those things for something that wasn't even what I thought it was. That was the first one. That was the biggie. And it's right there. And then that's when I started noticing, you know, the things that they put out are not accurate all the time. And the way they, you know, she was almost 15. She was, you know, the little worse than...
A few months shy of her 15th birthday.
And you know, it was common. Right? It was common in that day. No, it wasn't. You know, and it was just all these little things. And then I knew firsthand how bad a Mormon PR can be because of the ordained women movement, and what PR said happened and what I know happened because of the women of huge integrity that I know that were there and know what happened, didn't happen. You know, but they tried to paint them out to be something that they were not. And that bothered me too, because it was like pitting sister against sister. And I couldn't understand why my sisters in the church would have a problem with that, because you don't have to go and do that, but can't you allow them to do that? You know, there's this thing that kind of happens to get you to how do I explain it? Conform. And it's usually they use something against you, you know, like I know the second action, they actually had a woman there to turn them away. You know, just things like that. There were just things that, you know, I just started picking up on where things weren't accurate because I wasn't looking at things with the glasses that everything's perfect, and they can do no wrong. You know, I was raised to believe that the church would never go astray. In fact, I remember hearing hearing general authorities say that can never happen. It's impossible. That will never happen. The church will never be led astray. And, you're thinking all that, but once you start seeing these things that just don't make sense, and I'm thinking, would a superior being make all these? It's like making, everything was like a pretzel. When you talk about apologists and things like that, every time we'd go there, it would be like, oh my gosh, you have to go here to get this and to get that, and then you figure this out, and then this is what happens, and this is the result. And I just wanted I'm Marilyn Deede's daughter. I just want a straight black and white answer, and my parents always told me the truth. And the church that raised me always said to tell the truth and to speak the truth and to speak it clearly. And if I didn't say the truth, then I was to apologize. You remember the R's? You recognize, restore, and then restitution, repent and then restitution. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I'm not seeing any of this going on here, and I am a product of that. And I wasn't seeing it go. And then when Elder Oaks said, we do not apologize, we don't. We don't. Of course we do. Of course we do. It's, that's things like that, I don't know. But it makes me sad. It makes me sad because.
Do you remember the moment where you're like, it's not true, or I'm done? Either of those moments can be really big moments for people.
Well, you know what's interesting about that? We were having a conversation the other night with some people, and everyone that I know that is a post-Mormon has a moment like that. And they can remember. I remember when Sotherton went to bed at night, a believer, and woke up in the morning, a non-believer. He did it in his dreams. I know someone that sat down at a computer to look up masonry. 4 hours later, that wasn't even a thing, but 4 hours later, because it went into Joseph Smith, she was done. And there's this feeling that you go, oh my gosh, And for me, Terry was first. This is how I knew Terry was done. And it's when he came to me and sat down next to me and held my hand and said, there's not one thing I learned in primary that I learned when I was a young man in my priesthood quorums, that I taught people in the mission field, that I taught and counseled people as a bishop. Not one thing that is accurate or has not been distorted or is a fabrication. And he was bereft. And I knew, because I kept saying, we need to hang on, we need to hang on, we need to hang on. This thing will work out, you'll see. And when I looked into his eyes and saw the sorrow and the depths of that sorrow and how he felt so betrayed. And I knew he was done. I knew. So I felt that first. And then he said to me...
Do you remember the year of that about?
That would have been 13, 14, something like that. And he said, he took my hand, about 2013, yeah, and he took my hand and he said, I will go to church with you. I will sit with you. I will hold your hand. Until, doesn't matter. I will support you. And I remember thinking, you better, because this is the most important decision I'm ever going to make, and I'm making it all by myself. Because I was taken to church. I went to church because my grandmother loved me, and I loved her, and I knew she would never have do anything, put me anywhere I'd be in any harm's way. I'd followed the commandments. Men had told me what to do, how to think, how to dress, how to walk. This was going to be my decision. It was going to be mine. And because I also knew that it would be something that I would have to, because, in the beginning you worry about, am I doing the right thing? Am I harming my family? Am I being led by, Satan? Am I being you have all these feelings in the beginning, but then when you keep going, as things fall from your mind and your mind becomes yours again, and you can make good judgments, and you keep making good judgments, and you keep making good judgments, and then you have that time where you just know you're there. And then you get that feeling of, oh no, am I ready for my losses? Am I ready for the loss of your friends, your family? You don't know who's going to stay and who's going to go. Your reputation, you fall from grace in many people's eyes, and you have all these things. But there comes a point in your life where you just have to own your stuff. And although I wish. You know what I hear in every post-Mormon say? Never in a million years. How many times have you heard that, John? Never in a million years, and never in a million years did I think I would find myself in that position.
So you're saying you did have a moment, or you didn't have a moment?
I don't know that I did have a moment, because after I saw Terry, and after that, and then we went a couple of more times. And then finally I just said, because we went to, trying to think, 2013 we didn't believe, so it would have been at the beginning, but we still attended because we thought we could be good. Maybe we can help with the gay thing, maybe we can help with feminism, we can help. But then all of a sudden we realized, wait a minute, we couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't listen to what was being taught in gospel doctrine. I couldn't listen to what was being taught across the pulpit. I wanted to stand up many times and say, if you're going to be here and sacrifice your life and pay 10% of your tithing, your gross, know your religion. Do you really know your theology? Do you even understand it? Because I didn't. I thought I knew, and I consider myself pretty smart, and I knew lots of things, and I studied the scriptures, but until I really got in and just really saw the big picture, and then saw how everything laid out, it was, and so I admire people, but I don't think I'm any, this is the hard part for me. I don't think I'm any smarter than anybody else just because I have someone that loves the church and stays in the church. I don't look at it that way. I don't look at it like, well, yeah, open your eyes and then you'll really understand the truth. I don't feel that way. I feel like every person has to listen to the sound of their own drummer, and my drummer led me here, but I respect you where you're at. I would never take that away from you. Do you know what I mean? And so this othering of people is so terrible. It's so terrible. Why do we have to do that? But I know why. It's because we're conditioned, like I was, that people like me are dangerous. People like me are bad. People like me are being influenced by Satan. So don't be around people like me. But you know where their cognitive dissonance comes in? Because they know me. They've been around me my whole life. They know I'm a good person. But yet they have this story in their head that they have to do. But they're looking at me and trying to decide, how does this work?
Yeah.
I don't know. And that's why, I don't know. But I'm just trying to think. So there we are. I knew we couldn't do it anymore. He knew we couldn't do it anymore.
Church was driving you crazy.
Church was driving me crazy. And then there was one more hurdle. I talked to my daughter, and I said...
Which one?
Jenny, my oldest. And I said to Jennifer, in tears, I said, I don't know how long I can hang on. But because I had been the Mormon grandmother to my grandchildren. And I said, but Jenny, I want you to know that I will fake it. If this causes any harm to my grandchildren and to your family, I will fake it. I will do. I'll just buck up and I'll just go through the motions, and I will be that person. And she said, let me think about that. And a couple of days later, she came back to me and she said, Mom, I thought about it, and I decided that I want you to be who you are. I want you to be the person that you are. And she said, you're going to be the one to teach my children how to handle life when it doesn't go the way you thought it was. You will be that person for them. And it's like the weight of the world. That was probably more my moment, because it was like, I'm free to be me. I am free. I can do this thing, right? I can do this thing. I've had friends that have daughters and sons that say to their mothers, please, lie, do whatever you can, just fake this. Please don't do this to us. And I think how grateful I am for a wise daughter who chose to look at it that way. And because of that, I have really good relationships with my grandchildren. Nothing changed. I talked to my 17-year-old granddaughter, and and I told her just a titch, like, now Grandma's not going to church anymore, and blah, blah, blah. And she goes, okay, what else? And I said, so you still love me? Yep. Okay, let's get on with life. I mean, it's just like that. It's just been really good. And I don't know if our family's just not judgmental, and that's why we've all been able to be more flexible or more caring or more something. I don't know. But I'm grateful for whatever it is that's woven in here, that is empathetic. I know that my children were changed in Bolivia. You can't see human suffering and poverty and the things that they saw and not be touched by that, and so anyway, so there we are.
But they're their mother's children.
And their fathers.
They're their parents' children, and they're their grandparents' children.
Yes, they are.
And now you're able to be, maybe in some ways, to your children and grandchildren what your mother was to you and your children.
Mm-hmm. Except for, I have great sorrow about that, John, because I don't know if we ever really get to know our parents as people, in real life. But I always had it was not unconditional. I always wanted my parents to be Mormon. And even Jennifer said that one time, that one of her sorrows was that when she realized that she had that same thing about her grandparents that she adored. But why couldn't they be Mormon, right? And so I don't know, we're just taught to make those labels or to make those boxes and put people in boxes or things like that, and I feel bad, because I feel like that kept me from really knowing my mother deeply and understanding. And when
Have you ever wondered why they weren't Mormon? Like maybe they had good reasons.
Well, my dad always told us kids that the reason he wasn't active in the church, he says, because he said no man has the right to judge another man.
That's so profound, isn't it?
He said his whole life. He said that's God's deal, and no man has that right. And that always bothered him, that the interviewing, all these questions and all this stuff. And that always bothered him. And my mother was a free spirit. She was raised back east, and she was smart. She skipped her junior year, and that's why she was 17 when she met my dad. She'd already finished high school. She was an artist. She was an incredible person in that regard. But I wish I could sit down with her now and talk to her about things. And my dad, although it would just be about this part of my life, because the other part, the part that I had with them, is I have no regrets. When my parents died, we had said everything we needed to say. There was no need to repair anything. We were lucky in that regard. We had all good feelings, and we were able to, that was not.
But now you get to model real intimacy and unconditional love to your children and grandchildren, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So that's like a step forward for the next generation.
Yeah, and the thing too is, like I told my granddaughters, I said, if you have a new beginnings night, or you have something where you get an award, I will be there. If you're doing something anything in your life, I will be there. I don't think, well, I'm not going to that church again, or I'm not, I got over my angry phase a long, long time ago, when I was mad at what a few things and stuff that way. But I've never been offended. We've had one bishopric meeting with, we quit going the 1st of 2014. We decided we would take a step back because we tried everything else and it wasn't working. Nothing was keeping us. And so we thought, we'll just not go and see. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to miss it, or the Spirit's going to call me back, or I'm going to this and this, And it never did. It never did. And we just kept going, and we just kept going, and we just kept researching and kept everything that way. But it was like we thought that was somehow would change something, and it didn't. We weren't prepared for the gift of Sunday. Oh my gosh, that was like. Sundays are amazing days. A lot of days are amazing days and all that stuff. But there was some I was going to tell you about Jenny, and now I can't remember what that was. But it sucks.
So I think you were talking about your ward and maybe how they didn't. Did they come after you?
Oh, this is what happened. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
We hadn't been for like 6 months. I think it was 6 months. And I answered the door one night, and it was the whole bishopric. And I said, come in. Terry wasn't here. And so I had them come and sit down. And they're all exceptional men. And they're still serving as the bishopric here. And they sat down in the front room. And at that point, I have to tell you something. I had heard you say something long time before about there was something to keeping your journey private so that you could go through everything without outside interference or people trying to nail your foot to the floor or say, what is it you believe and don't believe, when you're trying to figure all that out anyway. It was very wise. For me, it was extremely wise. For Terry, it was extremely wise because we were able to go through all the gyrations, up, down, in and outs of it, everything. We could do that with ourselves. And consequently, what happens is a healing as you get going and you become stronger and you have more conviction about where you're at. And so when these brethren came that night, I was ready. I was ready to talk. I didn't feel ambushed because I was ready. I wasn't afraid. And when I sat down and talked with them, they were very kind, very good to me. And the bishop did ask, well, why, can we ask why you're not coming to church? And I said, well, before I tell you why, I want to tell you why not, what it isn't. What it is, I want to tell you what it isn't. And he said, okay. And I just said, it's not because I was offended. I said, I've never been offended. Hey, if you're going to get offended, you don't belong in any church. People are going to offend you right and left. I said, I've never been offended. I forgive easily. I forget even faster. I said, so nobody has done anything, said anything, hurt our feelings, none of that. It doesn't exist. And I said, I love the people in my ward. I love them. I genuinely love them. And I said, so that's not it. I said, it's not because of my gay allyship. Because you know what? I said, if I feel like I would be an asset in the ward with educating people how to love. We don't have to go into the politics of it all, but I could teach them how families could work together and how important it is that families work together and do all of these things right. But I said, you and I both know that if I came out as a gay ally, I will never serve in any position where there's children. I'll never serve in primary. I'll never serve anywhere. And they all went, yeah, you're right. But they didn't do it like, no, they were saying, yeah, that's probably true. Kindly. They knew. And it was like, and then I said, and it's not because of my feminism, because I think I'd be really great in the ward with the young women, I think I could empower the young women, and think I could have meaningful experiences with the young women. I love young women. That would be where I'd want to be, or be with the women in Relief Society, right? And so it's like, and I said, but if I come out as a feminist, I will never teach Relief Society. I will never do, all these things. And it was like, and I said, and I said, and if so they're going, so I go through all these reasons, which they kind of think are the reasons, because that's what I complain about.
Did you include a desire to sin?
No, they didn't ask about that. And I said, I don't have any problems with anything. I pay my tithing. I didn't go into those details, but I just said all of these basic ones, and then I said that, and then they're like waiting for the reason, because I think people assume that because of my advocacy on Facebook or whatever, or when I talk to people or whatever, and I just said, I no longer believe. I said, I've done enough research and study and all this, and it's not what I thought it was, and it's not portrayed as I thought it was. It is not, And then I don't know that they knew what to do with me then. And then Terry came home, and then I said, like, I had a hard time with the essays, and the bishop said, what essays?
What essays, yeah.
And I go, you haven't read the essays. And back then, when I talked to them, you had to go looking for them, and they were very difficult to find, remember? Until somebody put them all together, all the links together, right?
Yeah.
And then I think somebody thought that was really going to a bogus website, that it really wasn't the church it was going to. They couldn't believe the church was saying that stuff.
Yeah, anti-Mormon essays.
Yeah. So it was like, so I said, well, I will send you the essays. And then I went upstairs, and Bob Reese did that book with Caitlin Ryan.
Family Acceptance
Project. I had about 10 brochures upstairs. So I said, I've got something for you. And I ran upstairs and I got those, and I said, here, these will be really handy for you. I said, if you ever want to ask me anything, I'm here. And you can take this. And what was interesting is he took those, and then I did send him an email with all the links. And then there were a couple more, but I never heard back from any of the bishopric about that. One of the counselors, I think I'm not really, how do I put this? I don't really know my bishop very well, but one of the counselors I know very well, and he's just an outstanding person, and he's been very good to Terry and I and stuff that way. In fact, I had an experience with Jeff. We had a kid just down the street that came out to me on one night. He just sent me a message and told me, and I spent some time just talking to him to make sure he was okay. And he comes from a very, very good family, and but I knew that they would have a difficult time. And I talked to him. I wanted to make sure he was okay, that he wasn't depressed, or anything like that and stuff. So I wrote him, and then I told Brother Peo about that experience, because I wanted him to know that I would never say anything to them that would be contrary to what they feel, as Latter-day Saints and stuff. So he's been great. And then I went to his daughter's homecoming a week ago. First time back to church in 3 years, almost 4 years, right? And you know what? I loved it. You know why? Because I'm done. I'm so done. And I had no anger. I had love in my heart for everyone there. And I got to hug people, even though they had othered me and hadn't seen some of them for 3 years. I was cut off. And I came out with about 5 maybe really good friends that still, kind of hung around, wanted to be friends.
From your ward? From
my ward. But everyone came up and hugged me and said they missed me and everything, and it was genuine and it was wonderful, and I just knew I'd made the right decision, and I was happy to be there. Do you know what I mean? I was in a good mental state. Yeah. It was my litmus test. If I would have felt angry or would have felt like, then I thought, you still have more work to do, right? I didn't. I just felt very confident in my decision, very happy about that, but I also was allowed, not allowed, but I also realized that they were an important part of my life, and I loved them, and you know what I mean? And even those that didn't communicate with me, all was forgiven. It all just went washed away. Just all washed away.
So did they ever get back with you on the essays when you sent them the essays?
No, and I never got an email back.
And it's just...
And we've never had a visit.
And
since.
you never had a visit. You're cut off. What is that like to serve decades in the church, and then when someone who should have all sorts of credibility, all sorts of capital built up, as soon as you sort of say, oh, this doesn't make sense, this isn't working, to just get stone silence and complete disconnection? You say now you've worked through it. Was there ever a point where that made you sad or frustrated you, that you hadn't built up enough credibility or capital to where, like, at least you deserved some engagement, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I cooked so many meals for people and helped with funerals and taught lessons and rubbed shoulders for years and years and years. And it's funny how that gets forgotten. Well, you know what? I kind of knew a little bit, because you know why? We had been teaching young single adults, and I had one of my young single adults who was 18 resign from the church. From 1 minute to the next, it felt like to me. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what an 18-year-old does that? Mm-hmm. You know, she's just a kid. Why would she make that gigantic of a situation and blah, blah, blah? But she had made a decision based on things that she had read, and her whole family, one by one, went. And I remember sitting here thinking, this family is kind of disappearing from the Word, and nobody's turning an alarm on. Nobody's saying, what are we going to do for this family? Nobody's doing anything. And I remember that's how I first noticed what was going on. Because it was like, because I never in a million years would have said Mormons would do that. Mm-hmm. Never. And I thought, this is so weird. And so I remember going in and talking to my bishop at the time and said, what are we going to do about her? And he said, well, her parents shouldn't have let her read the stuff she was reading. And I remember thinking, yeah, your kids are kind of young. Wait till you get teenagers, you don't tell them what to read and not read. You don't have that kind of control. You may think you do, but you don't, you know. But it was like, but I could tell that wasn't going to go anywhere, that there was anger at what had happened. And I remember walking out, and I remember, this is an interesting thing. I knew Terry and I were going. I could feel it, and I could feel these things happening. And this is part of your bargaining part, you know, where you try to work it out, right? And after this happened, then I started noticing things. And then Brett Nord had left. And I didn't know Brett very well at all. I just thought he was this really cool guy, but I didn't know him.
This is someone in your ward.
Yeah, and I couldn't understand why nobody talked about Brett anymore either. It's like Brett disappeared. And I'm like, what is this going on? What is this thing that's happening? You know, there's no missionary work or no efforts, no anything. It's like total out. So I'm like, I see him down at a grocery store, and I sent him a message, and I said, I know we don't know each other very well, but I just want you to know I miss you. And I don't care what your reasons are. Can we always be friends? You know, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what this was, you know, this thing. And then this othering thing, you know, and stuff. So we talked one time at Halloween down at Harmon's, and we talked a lot, and I got more of an insight into him and his world. So I kind of knew as we were going down that path, this is what's going to happen to us. And, you know, where if I hadn't had these other experiences, I wouldn't have known what was going to happen, right? Or how it was going to go. So our home teacher was the high priest group leader at the time. And he was sitting there, and I remember saying to him, you know, there's a group of people that you need to be made aware of that need our help and need our support. And he said, well, who would that be? And I said, well, they're active tithe-paying, temple-going, valiant, committed people in the church, and they're struggling. And they're struggling with their testimony, and they're struggling with some things. And he goes, no, they're not. He said, that's not what the problem is. The problem is they just want to do something. They want to go sin, or they just want to do something with their life. They just, how could anybody be like that? And I remember thinking, okay, one down, Then I went to the mission leader, ward mission leader, who I adore. He's a wonderful man. And at the time I said, this isn't going to make a lot of sense to you, because I was speaking about myself, but I couldn't say it was me. And I said, Jack, there's this group of people you've got to watch out for. You know how you, in the mission, you are reactivating members, you're not just reactivating. What is it? You're converting members to the church and reactivating members to the church, right? And he goes, yes. And I go, there's a third group. What is that? And I said the same thing. I said it's active members that are hearing things, knowing things, that are struggling, that have nowhere to go. You've got to find them. And I remember him thinking, I remember he scoffed, the first guy, but this guy didn't. But I don't think he knew what I was talking about, because I couldn't say, it's me. There's a lot of us. There's a ton of us, and there's no help anywhere, and we can't talk to anybody, and nobody's going to tell us we're bad or we're sinning or we want to do all this stuff. That's not what it's about, blah, blah, blah. And so I tried on some level to get some awareness, at that, but then later on, it didn't happen.
They don't want it. They don't want it.
No.
They don't want to know. They don't want to think about it.
No. But I think there's some wards, though, that I think bishops are learning, and they're trying to figure things out and maybe being kinder about it, and they're having some success with at least people feeling like they can maybe at least talk to people or ask about things or do whatever they need to do. I don't know. Some people do better talking about it and getting it out there and talking with their bishop and going through that. And some people like Terry and I are more private and needed to do it by herself. It was we didn't even like talk to our kids. I mean, it was like, we're going to figure this out first before we do this thing, So anyway, those were my last attempts at trying to do something in that regard, even though and then we just quit going, and we had a cabin up in. It just coincided with the time we bought the cabin up in Midway, and we couldn't wait to get in the car. We'd get in the car and we'd turn on a podcast, and we'd listen to the podcast all the way up to Midway, and then we would talk our brains out all night long, get up in the morning, talk our brains out all morning long. We just, I found that in a lot of couples who were on the same page, that was almost a profound byproduct, was new communication, new ways of speaking to each other, new ways of speaking more authentically and speaking their truth, things they couldn't say before because they were supposed to be a certain thing or role model a certain way. And I've heard that from countless couples, that how communication got better. I don't know, you've probably heard that too.
No, there's all sorts of things.
Yeah, and I'm sure, but to counterbalance that, there's also the marriages that destroyed, and the marriages where people couldn't talk and couldn't find common ground, and I mourn for those. I don't know that I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg. I think sometimes those things, if they're just being held together by a fear, when that's gone, I know maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But to close out this second segment, it sounds like by mid-2014, you guys were done.
Yeah.
All right. So the next
by the
section is going to be
first of 2014.
Right.
End of 13. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so the next section is going to be what comes next. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Can we move on to that?
Sure.
All right. Well, let's wrap up this episode. So these are 2 episodes.
Now you are going to edit this, right?
Yeah. But I'll just close. This is parts. Thank you for joining us for parts 1 and 2 of Mormon Stories podcast with Kim Sanders. It's been Kim Sandberg Turner. Yeah. It's been wonderful. And stay tuned for parts 3 and maybe 4 and 5. We'll see to hear what comes next. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Talk to you soon.
As a square peg, try to fit in a round hole all of your life. I'm so glad you know who you are. And I felt love for him. I didn't feel anything. But then it was like, uh-oh, now what are we going to do? You know? And you go through a period of time because then that's church. You know, we were active, believing, faithful, committed in members, you know? And now all of a sudden we've got this problem. But see, at the time, it was still kind of, it was interesting because people would ask, well, what are we going to do? Or all this stuff. And I remember thinking, what do you mean, what are we going to do? You know, life goes on. I mean, I didn't know I had to do something, right? Because 20 years ago, it was a choice in the church. You know, it was, Dallin Oaks was saying things like, don't let your kids around. Your gay members don't, you know, everybody was getting kicked out of their houses. There was all of this going on, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, you know, if we kick Josh out, that would destroy my family. Not keeping him in my family. I mean, I didn't get that. I didn't get that rhetoric at all. People have asked me why Terry and I were like that, but I don't know how else to explain it. I don't know. We just felt he was my son. I loved my child. I knew my child. And I felt, and that was...
Around what year was this?
This was, he was 18, he's 36, so about 18, it's been about 18,
so around
20
2000.
years ago. Yeah, and it was like,
so this is after Magic Johnson.
Yeah. Oh, you know, speaking of Magic Johnson, that was interesting because and then coming home was a shock. And we came home here 20 years ago, and in a ward that they really didn't need us. I mean, there were clones of us everywhere, you know, and which is good. I mean, that's not something to complain about, but it was like, we missed being able to be so involved in that way. Now, at that time, Kyle, you need to start asking me questions because I just meander here.
No, so let's just say that this first segment, we're at about an hour.
Okay.
And this segment's going to be kind of representing your faithful time. So
yeah.
What other stories do you think are really important for the listeners to know to sort of capstone your faithful Mormon experience?
Well, one of the things, if we're going to before this time, is, you know,
so the next episode will be your faith challenges.
My third son, we could kind of tell as a teenager that he was a little different, and thinking, could Josh be gay? And but then you go, no. And then you go back and forth that you kind of know, but you kind of don't. And basically at that time, I really didn't have any feelings about that one way or the other. I had not been around that many gay people. And then but then my boss, when I first started working at 18, she was a lesbian. But I knew she was a lesbian, but I didn't know what that meant. You know, you just didn't question anything, I guess, you know, and unless somebody was really open about things. But it was a great experience, and all the gay people, when I thought about it up to that point that I'd ever been around, were wonderful human beings. I had a guy that has done my hair now for years and years and years, and he was one of the first people, and I've even told Ron, I said, you're one of the reasons why I had such good experience or good formation, because you were such a good person. That's all I had to go from, because I never got anything negative from my parents. And at the time, the world really that I lived in didn't talk about things very much. I just had these experiences going along and stuff. But then when he was 18 and confirmed to us that you don't know for sure until they tell you, and they don't know for sure until they say it. And he told Terry first, and then he was coming home here to tell me, and we went upstairs and sat in the chair, and I remember thinking, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? What am I going to say? Because I knew it was really important that I say the right thing, and how did I feel, And so when he was sitting there, and he told me and stuff, and I said, welcome to the world. I've been watching you. I was talking to the counselor, and I made this appointment, and I said, I just want to come in and talk about some things. And she said, okay. And then before I hung up, I said, can I ask you a question? Yes. What do you think about homosexuality? And she said, oh, well, it's an abomination. And she used words like pedophilia and even what's the animal one?
Bestiality.
Bestiality. She used these words, and I remember looking at my phone just horrified, and I'm going, oh my gosh. And I put the phone back up to my ear, and I said, how long has it been since you were in school? She said 5 years. I've been out 5 years. And I said, I think you need to go back to school. Why? I said, because I think you need to relearn some things. And then she said, does this mean that you're not coming in for counseling? I said, that's exactly what it means. And so, I kind of felt like, there weren't places for us to go. My children, this is really an important story. You don't get very many opportunities to see your children being noble. And my children were noble. They were wonderful kids, and they were so good to Josh. But Josh asked me if I would tell Jonathan, and Jonathan's younger than Josh. And I said, okay. So I was in the car with Jonathan, and I said to John, John, Josh asked me to tell you something. Yes, he's gay. And Magic Johnson came on television, and my kids were into basketball, and all that stuff. And he did a press conference, and he said something. He said, God gave me this disease, and I'm going to do all I can to be helpful to other people who have it, and to help and to do this and blah blah blah, And I remember sitting there looking at that, and I remember I walked over, turned the TV off, and I turned around and looked at my kids. I said, God didn't give him that disease. He gave it to himself by his behavior and his actions in his life. He created that problem. God didn't. I said, now, is God going to be with him? Yes. Is God going to help him? Yes, I believe that. But this is wrong. this doesn't, it didn't work for me, in that. Yeah. And God didn't give anything to Josh to overcome either. He didn't do any of those things. Josh is Josh. That's who he is and how he was born. And I remember that was so hard, and trying to figure that and the church out. And then I remember I called this woman up who had a beauty salon, and I knew her son worked there, and I knew her son was gay, because I couldn't talk to anyone. There wasn't anyone you could talk to. And I called her one day, and I said, can I come and talk to you? And she said, yes. I said, I'm a stranger, and I know you have a gay son. I just want to talk to somebody, and I want to talk to a mother. She said, come over, and I went over. We went at the top of her business there, and we sat there, and I just asked her questions and how it was, and I was really lucky because she loved her son, and had accepted her son. It wasn't somebody telling me anything bad, and it was really nice to talk to someone and say that. I called a counselor one time, and